Okay, this is a unedited ad hoc video. My name is Michael Fosha, and the reason for this video is to gain help with my GoFundMe campaign and to familiarize you with who I am and why I need your assistance, and why it's incumbent upon you to help me, because first and foremost, it is because that what has happened to me can happen to you. What can happen to you is you can be targeted and politically persecuted for your politically unpopular but protected rights, because of corrupt individuals within our government that are completely misapplying the law. And the only way we're going to get justice is to hold these people accountable and to make them pay restitution and to make sure that they lose their jobs and they're not put in a position of trust again, because that's what they are. They're exercising a position of trust. And whenever they abuse that trust, it's the function of the citizen to keep the government in check and from falling into error. It's not the function of the government to keep the citizen from falling into error. It's the function of the citizen to keep the people in a position of trust from abusing their power. And so that's what this campaign is about. It's about, number one, aiding me for being falsely imprisoned for an act the law doesn't make criminal. Now, the act that I was allegedly targeted with was for selling my own property, personal, private property of guns. And no, I have never been convicted of any crime before. Okay? Selling my own property of guns, which is protected not only in the Constitution, if you think the Constitution applies, which it really doesn't apply, but it's protected by the natural law, by the biblical law, by the law of nations, by our laws, by the Supreme Court, in countless cases. So to find out that they're using procedure to override the law by denying you access to the courts, by saying, oh, you procedurally defaulted, so you can't use that argument, or you can't put that into evidence, or you can't make that argument, is preposterous. But yes, that's what they're doing. When you are in a court of law and you are prevented from even arguing what the law says, and the jury is prevented from seeing the law itself or being able to read the law, and you have the judge telling the jury, I will tell you what the law is, you decide the facts, then we're no longer a government of laws, we're a government of men, and tyranny commences. And you may say, well, you shouldn't have been selling guns, because guns are inherently bad. But that's just simply not true. It's an inanimate object. What makes it bad is the personality behind the gun. And this is just a fact of life. Now, I recently became a follower of a gentleman by the name of Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. And he probably put it most succinctly of what they're doing. It's an ideology. It's a Marxist ideology. And it's there to disarm you. It's there to really control you by some tyrants. Because at the end of the day, bad judgments are made all the time by people, period. Whether they're officers of the law or why they're just a member of the general population. And yes, do we have some people that are completely irresponsible? Absolutely. Absolutely, some people shouldn't be armed. Absolutely, some people have violent tendencies. But when you're putting people in prison, you're stealing all their equity. Equity meaning all their right to their life, liberty, and property. Their ability to provide emotional, mental, financial support to people of their family, their mother, their father, their sister, their brother, their children, their spouse. Then that's inherently wrong. And I don't think anybody can say that's right by any stretch of the imagination. And if you doubt about what happens when guns are taken away from the general population, there's a great video on the internet. It's a documentary. I'm trying to think of the name of it. I'll think of it and post it on another video. But believe me, it's an ideology that they want the few that want to control the many, because the law is not about it is not about justice and righteousness. It's about created by the few to control the many. Okay? And first of all, and foremost, let me say that the Constitution was only created for virtuous and spiritual people that were self-governing, which means self-responsible, that followed the laws of the Bible. And if you weren't a virtuous person, then you had to be governed, because if you can't govern yourself, then you have to be governed without. But what these people want to do is the bad actors. When you have some bad actors within our government that are trying to usurp the power and abuse their authority, is for self-aggrandizement. It's for their self-promotion. It's to enrich themselves at people's expense. And it doesn't matter whether what you did was right or wrong, if they can vilify you. And Thomas Jefferson said a long time ago, oppression occurs when infamy is imposed on the citizen by the state. And this is so true. Oppression occurs when infamy is imposed on the citizen by the state. In other words, when you're vilified. And that's what they do a lot of times. They vilify you. And so you become really, in truth, and in fact, you become guilty until proven innocent. And in fact, the law they're using, that is true. And they won't even tell you what the nature and cause of action is. Because in these courts really are not courts. These courts are administrative courts. They're not judicial courts. And so you are considered guilty until proven innocent. And what proves that is just ask them what the nature and cause of action is. Ask them if it's common law, which common law means that there has to be an injured party. Okay? Obviously, there's no injured party because the tangible can't have parity with the intangible. That means the fiction, the corporation, can't have parity with the real live man. So it can't be common law because you haven't injured any party if you're disposing of your own property, if you're selling your own private property of guns. So then, is it equity? Equity implies there's a contract. But they won't ever tell you it's equity, because then they'd have to put the contract in the record. Well, what is a contract? That I'll leave up to your imagination, which I can inform you of what it is later on down the road. But at this point, it's probably more than most people understand. Now, or is it admiralty or maritime jurisdiction? If it's admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, again, there has to be a contract. And the judge says, oh, well, this is not the water. So what they'll tell you is, oh, it's statutory law. Well, where in the Constitution under Article 3 is statutory law? It doesn't exist. And statute comes from the statute merchant. The statute merchant implies that there's a contract. It's a bond. Now, typically if you enter in a contract, you got to do it knowing, willingly, and intelligently with full disclosure, fully informed and fully apprised of what the contract relates. But they don't tell you what it is because they're using presumptions of law. They're using what they call presumptions of law sub silentio, which means silently observing that you're bound to the law. And ignorance is no excuse of the law. You hear them say that all the time. Well, ignorance is no excuse of the law both ways. It slices both ways. Well, they want to use ignorance of the law because they say, well, we didn't know it. Well, hell, they're arbiters of the law. They have no excuse not to know the law. They're the enforcers of the law. To say that the individual that isn't in law enforcement, that's just a part of the general population, can't plead ignorance of the law, and that you can is ludicrous. And it's beyond any man's reasonable rationalization. I guess I get caught up on a tangent here, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that if they can convict me of a crime or an act that the law doesn't make criminal, then they can convict you of an act the law doesn't make criminal. And when you've been imprisoned for 51 months, I have seen where there were a lot more people that belonged in prison that need to be in prison. There's no question about that. But there's a lot of people, there's quite a few people, I should say, that are innocent and were less fortunate. I mean, they got a lot of time that they didn't belong there to be in there. And what's even worse is that you have people in prison and the BOP in general that are negligent and abusing their authority and not giving people the proper medical care. I mean, really, if you want to know what single payer health care is like, just ask anybody in prison. It's basically non-existent because there's no incentive for them to do the right thing because they're protected. They put you through this administrative process that they says, oh, well, you got to go through what they call the Prison Litigation PLRA Reform Act, which is you got to go through your administrative processes. Well, they do everything to subvert the administrative process to keep you from getting it. They'll hide the paperwork. They'll say they responded. Then if they don't respond in 30 days, then they'll ask for 45 days, and you respond in 45 days. Then it's 45 more days after that. So before you even get resolution on administrative process, a year has passed. And then you got to file it in court. So you could be dead at that point. And that's really the only time you get medical care is if you're about to die, because then they have extreme liability. But I know people in prison right now that didn't commit a crime, that their hip is completely disintegrated. And it happened while they were in prison. And they're walking around, and some of them aren't even walking, they're in wheelchairs because of the negligent actions of those people in power. And that's how they're trained. They're trained not to give you health care. They really are. Unless they know it's going to kill you. They want to see you crippled. At least the ones that I've experienced. And this may not be indicative from a nationwide perspective, but it certainly was locally. And from what I'm told from a lot of these COs, is that they're trained like this. They're trained because they don't want you to have remedy. They're trained that anybody in prison is a liar and don't give you remedy. Don't give you help. So it's a shame, and there are a lot of people that lie, unfortunately. That's what we have. But what this video is about, as I digress, it's about seeking your help. It's about seeking more as a legal defense fund and a legal offense fund to aid me in getting restitution and holding those accountable that have abused their authority. Now, I can't tell you that when I'm going to win. I know I'm going to win. There's just no question in my mind about that. The question is, how long is it going to take? I don't believe it's going to be protracted because the law's on my side. I mean, the law is clear. I've read countless books. I studied the law.